Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to compare 3 yarns for felting, and at least one of them might completely fail, but let's see. Just a bit of background first. I was researching feltable yarns, and while browsing LindeHobby, I noticed they actually have a feltable yarn category, which made it really easy to choose a few yarns to test. The shipping from Denmark was really fast as well, so I was very pleased about that. And I'm really excited to start testing these yarns. So let's begin. Here is how I'm going to compare them. I'm going to both hand knit and machine knit the swatches. Then I'm going to felt them by hand and also in the washing machine. I'll measure the shrinkage, and then I'm even going to cut them open to see what's actually happening inside the felt. The 3 yarns I'm testing are Gjestal Ullrikke, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Drop Snow Mix Print, and Viking Hobbygarn. All of them are constructed differently and have different textures, so it'll be interesting to see how each of them behaves, both when knitted up and after felting. Before knitting anything, let's take a closer look. Gjestal Ullrikke feels soft and squishy. I think it will probably knit up nicely by hand, but I'm not completely sure how it will behave on the machine because it feels quite thick and it might be pushing the limit for the Addi Express machine for the thickness. Drop Snow feels smooth and it's a roving style yarn, so that probably means aggressive felting, but hopefully it will still be controlled. Viking Hobbygarn feels much thinner and more loosely twisted. It also feels quite smooth compared to the others, so I'm not sure how evenly it will felt, or even how quickly it will felt at all. So my predictions are Ullrikke will shrink into a dense felt fabric. Drops will shrink the most. And Viking, I honestly can't predict. It might completely surprise me. So let's go ahead and knit. I knitted equal swatches using the needle size recommended for hand knitting. I really enjoyed knitting with this yarn. It actually reminded me of Rowan Big Wool. I used to love the Rowan Big Wool pattern books. I love this color. The knitted fabric looks good. I normally knit with quite fine needles, like 2.75mm, so using 9mm needles took a few rows to get used to, but once I adjusted, the fabric looked good and felt quite soft. This yarn is also very quick to knit, and it's a smooth roving yarn, so the finished fabric looks slightly smoother than the Ullrikke. I actually found it a bit easier to knit with this than Ullrikke on 9mm needles, maybe because the yarn is smoother, who knows. But the fabric looks even and feels soft. When I first received this yarn, I'll be honest, I wasn't sure if I would like it. But once I started knitting, I was blown away by how enjoyable it was. Every stitch felt satisfying, almost addictive, and I really loved the way the yarn moved through my hands. And the finished swatch looks very good. I'm almost hoping it doesn't felt too well because I think this yarn would make wonderful garments and accessories. So, quick science moment. Felting works because wool fibers have microscopic scales. And when the heat, moisture and agitations are applied, especially when fibers are moving in different directions, those scales lock together permanently. And that's what turns a knitted fabric into felt. Now onto the Addi Express. As I predicted, Ullrikke feels slightly too thick for the machine. The finished swatch is very even, but the fabric is much tighter and firmer than the hand-knitted version. And if you're using this yarn on the machine and not felting it, it's probably best suited for projects like bags where a dense and sturdy fabric is actually useful. And it makes me wonder if this fabric might produce a very dense and even felt. We will see. Drops runs much better than Ullrikke, even though they are in a similar yarn weight category. The machine can handle it, but the yarn did get stuck occasionally. Again, compared to the hand knit swatch, the tension is tighter and the fabric is slightly thicker, but the machine knitted swatch looks good and I quite like the finished result. Viking Hobbygarn feeds into the machine the most consistently. It's really machine friendly. And I can crank the handle smoothly, and the finished swatch is very comparable to the hand knitted version in terms of tension, so I can hardly see the difference. Now for the moment of truth. I hand felted the swatches together so I could keep the amount of agitation, water and other variables as consistent as possible. At first, I tried using a sushi roller to control the agitation, but I quickly realized it wasn't providing enough heat or movement, so I switched to the classic method of dunking the fabric in hot soapy water. After felting the Ullrikke, I realized the others would felt quite easily as well, so I finished the drop snow and Viking Hobbygarn together. Both the hand-knitted and machine-knitted swatches felted well. Although it's hard to see on camera, the hand-knitted swatch looks slightly more felted with less visible stitch definition. And this may be because the machine-knitted fabric started off tighter, which likely limited fiber movement during felting. It's also possible that the machine-knitted swatch felted just as much internally, but the tighter structure kept the surface looking smoother. And this would make sense, since the percentage shrinkage was very similar between the two. The results were quite similar with drop snow. Again, the difference is subtle, but I felt that the hand-knitted swatch looked slightly more fully felted, while the machine-knitted version retained a more stitch definition. I do think this fabric could have felted further. With more agitation, both swatches would probably look more fully felted. The actual shrinkage was very similar, so structurally they likely felted to a similar degree. Viking Hobbygarn felted very well in both the hand-knitted and machine-knitted swatches. Because the original fabric was less dense than the other two yarns, both swatches developed a nicely felted surface with very little stitch definition. The machine-knitted swatch felted particularly well, most likely because the slightly looser tension allowed more fiber movement during felting. Overall, both hand-knitted and machine-knitted fabrics felted successfully. With more agitation, the fabrics could probably have felted further, and that's one advantage of hand felting. You have much better control and can stop exactly when the fabric looks right. So the moment of truth for the machine felted fabrics. Unfortunately, this part didn't go quite as planned. When I took the washing bag out, all the swatches had completely felted together into one solid ball, and I had to pull them apart just to open them out flat. My washing machine is a front-loading machine, as you saw, so I had to let the whole cycle run. If you have a top-loading machine, it would probably be much easier to check the felting progress periodically. The shrinkage itself was actually very good, but because the swatches had felted together into a ball, the fabric became uneven and it was very difficult to reshape them back into neat squares. So this was definitely maximum felting, but with very little control. And now for the fun part, let's cut them open. I'm using my sharpest scissors to cut across all the swatches, both vertically and horizontally. The cut edges look really interesting. Internally, the hand-knitted and machine-knitted swatches look surprisingly similar. You can see that some areas are not completely compacted, but the fabric doesn't unravel at the cut edges, which shows that the fibers have locked together well. The thickness is also very similar, although with drop snow, the machine-knitted swatch produced a slightly thicker felt. With Hobbygarn, because the yarn itself is finer than the other two, the cross-section looks tighter and more interlocked. Now I'll do the same for the machine felted swatches. Internally, these look quite similar to the hand felted samples, but noticeably thicker and more compact. They also fray less at the edges, which makes sense because they were felted more aggressively in the washing machine. After making this video, I learned quite a lot. Both hand-knitted and machine-knitted fabrics felt in very similar ways overall. One clear pattern I noticed is that the looser tension tend to produce a more visibly felted fabric with less stitch definition. Tighter fabrics can shrink just as much, but often keep a smoother surface and more visible stitches. Hand felting requires more effort, but gives much better control. You can watch the fabric change and decide exactly when to stop. Machine washing felting is much less predictable, especially with a front-loading machine, and it's harder to control the final result. Because the washing machine felting didn't go perfectly for me, I'll focus on the hand felting results for the following conclusions. If you want very little stitch definition after felting, Viking Hobbygarn is probably the best choice, especially for machine knitting as the yarn fits through the machine smoothly. If you want to knit quickly for felting, thicker yarns like Ullrikke and Drop Snow are good choices. If you want felted fabric that still keeps some stitch definition, tightly machine knitted fabrics like Ullrikke or Drop Snow work well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe and join me on my knitting journey. But for now, as always, happy knitting!